So, sole priority is about viewing work from God's perspective, to really see the value, the importance, the worship of it. Let me tell you a story that I came across as a person working in the toy industry. One of my clients called me up to let me know he was no longer working for the firm, the company that he was with. He had been let go. I was really surprised because the company had done extremely well and he was the VP of sales. It made sense that he had made the decisions correctly. Now, this guy was also a follower of Christ, and I got to know him as a godly man, and so it was especially very strange that he had been let go. He went on to tell me that he thought that he had been let go because he had actually done too well. You see, even though he had a modest salary contract, his contract also had a bonus structure that allowed him a certain percentage of increase in growth. And because the company had done so well, they owed him a tremendous amount of money. Well, they let him go rather than pay him. Now, the company was not based in the United States, so it would be very difficult for him to go ahead and pursue any kind of legal action. And he didn't know if he wanted to do that anyway, so he and his wife decided to pray about this before they made any decisions. And as they prayed, they decided to walk away from it, which was pretty astounding. And they did it for two reasons. One is they didn't want to be perceived as greedy, as money hungry. People knew they were followers of Christ, and didn't want people to say, "Oh, see, you're just like everybody else." And so they decided rather than have that happen, they wanted to honor God by walking away from it. They would trust Him. And the second reason they decided to walk away from it is they didn't want to be perceived as being vindictive. They didn't want to look like they were going to take their vengeance out on these people. They wanted to show the love of Christ. They wanted to show that they felt that God had a plan for them and that God would still come through and that this wasn't like the end of everything. And so they decided to let vengeance be God, just the way the Word of God says. Well, a few months later, he called me up to let me know that he had gotten another position. In fact, he was the North American president now for an Asian company. And he was very excited to get this position. And he told me about something that happened while he was interviewing that had changed his perspective on work. He told me that when he was in Japan interviewing with a number of Japanese companies, that it was pretty depressing. He was on a particularly gray day in Tokyo. He was in his hotel suite, and he just felt like he had made the wrong decision. He was second guessing his decisions, his prayer. He didn't feel good. So he decided to step out onto the balcony of his suite and get some fresh air. As he stepped out on the balcony, he looked up to see a spectacular vistage. It was Mount Fuji rising up over the skyline of Tokyo. He realized that had he stayed inside the room and not stepped out on the balcony, he completely would have missed this and not realized he had such a beautiful view. And that's when it happened. It was like a bolt of lightning from heaven. It was an epiphany. And it was God just spoke to his heart and said, you know, unless you decide to step out onto my balcony and see work from where I see it instead of where you see it, you're going to miss the beauty of work as it is worship to me, as it glorifies me. It transformed everything inside of him. He was renewed in spirit and very excited about wherever God was going to bring him. Well, that story brings it home to us because where do you see? Where do I see work? Where do I see career? Do I see it from inside this kind of a dark, dreary room where it's the same thing every day and there's no purpose for it except pay bills and maybe get something nice and then pay more bills and all that's important and it's part of our life, but it's more. There's much more than that. Do we see our work, our career as something that glorifies God? Do we see it as part of His plan for us? Do we see it as having Him prepared something for us that we should work in? Do we see the possibility that He has chosen the company that we're at? That He's chosen the people that we work with or work for? And maybe He's chosen us to be leaders, and maybe He's chosen us to be just people who execute the things that are given us to do. Do we see work as something that brings Him glory? Do we see work as worship? Do we see work as bringing eternity to people instead of just working to Friday to Friday to Friday? Maybe God's picture is bigger. It's eternity in the life of somebody, to bring something new of His light to the culture of the company, to the culture of leadership, to maybe even how things are, the way people work. It's mind blowing. It's spirit blowing when you begin to think of God having ordained the things that you work in, to think of your work as a calling. So, when you go back to work on Monday, or whenever after you see this video, how are you going to see work? Are you going to see it from the little dark office, the little dark room that you're in? Are you going to step out onto God's balcony and see it from there for all the glory that it is for His name and as worship? That's a big difference. It could inspire everything that you do. So think about that this week. Pray about that this week, and see how God inspires you to work for His glory. So until we meet again in another month, God willing, work in the light.